Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Amid rising tensions, Taiwan's biggest arms supplier, Washington, has sent the first batch of Abrams tanks to Taiwan, first ordered in 2019. So will Taiwan's purchase of these tanks provoke further Chinese military drills? How will US policy under Donald Trump affect Taiwan? Is American support sufficient to counter Beijing if they launch a full-scale offensive? And could the South China Sea be the next major flashpoint? Let's find out. Joining us is Ross Feingold. He is an Asia-based political risk analyst and legal expert. He advises multinational corporations on political risk in Asia and frequently provides analysis on regional geopolitical dynamics. Feingold is a director of the Association of American Resident Overseas. He is also recognised commentator on US, China and Taiwan relations. Thank you, Ross Feingold, for joining us. My first question to you is, China has expressed discontent over Taiwan receiving US Abrams tanks. Will this further escalate Chinese military drills around Taiwan?
Typically, when the United States makes weapon sales or when the United States delivers weapons to Taiwan, China will issue angry statements and they'll complain about this. They'll complain publicly. They'll also complain directly to the United States. But typically in the past, the mere act of announcing a weapons sale or delivery to weapons by itself has not been cause for China to engage in large military exercises. Of course, China's more recent habit is to engage in military exercises to show their unhappiness with Taiwan or Taiwan's relationship with the United States. So it's certainly possible that China might do something that they have not done in the past.
How do you view US policy towards Taiwan under President-elect Donald Trump?
That's a really interesting question because Trump himself, he's interested in China, but with regard primarily to a single issue, and that's the trade issue or the trade deficit that the United States has with China. When it comes to other China-related issues such as Hong Kong or Tibet or South China Sea or Taiwan, Trump himself has not really expressed strong opinions on these issues, or he doesn't talk about them directly. But we do know one thing about Trump's team and the people he's announced to be part of his national defense, foreign policy, security team. These are very hardline China people. So I think we should assume that under the next Trump administration, there's going to be a very friendly towards Taiwan Trump administration, especially, like I said, some of the people in leading roles like the Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor. These are going to be very pro-Taiwan people.
China has hoped for strengthened relationship with the United States under Trump. How will this impact Taiwan?
I think it's really difficult to assume that there's going to be a stronger or a positive relationship between China and the United States. There's the trade issue, which Trump really has a passion to deal with. He might raise tariffs significantly on Chinese goods. He might try to negotiate a new trade deal with China. But even if Trump negotiates successfully a new trade deal with China, under which China would buy more goods from the United States, we have to keep in mind that there's so many issues on the US-China agenda that cause relations to have a lot of friction. And it's really impossible at the moment to think that all those many issues that cause friction in the bilateral relationship are going to be resolved under a Trump presidency. I think it's probably more reasonable to assume that the issues that cause friction between China and the United States are going to continue to cause friction, and the relationship might worsen under the Trump administration.
The US continues with its one China policy. Do you think under Trump, Taiwan will be recognized as an independent, autonomous state?
Yeah, that's such a great question because there are a lot of people in the United States who say that the United States should recognize Taiwan, which means engaging in diplomatic relations, just like with any other country. Of course, right now, the United States and most other countries have what they call unofficial relations with Taiwan. They don't have an embassy in Taiwan. They have a representative office. Taiwan has representative offices and not embassies in other countries. I don't think Trump is prepared to go that far to engage in a formal diplomatic relations. So I think his administration is going to be very pro-Taiwan, but there's probably still some things they're not willing to do because they know that there would be a very fierce reaction from China if the United States was to suddenly say that it's ending its one China policy and is prepared to recognize Taiwan.
The recent Chinese drills at sea and in Taiwan's air defence zone have intensified. Do you think Taiwan is equipped to defend itself? And do you think the support from the US is enough to deter China?
Yeah, these are very, very difficult questions. We really don't know the answer. One thing we do know is that China has increased dramatically its military exercises around Taiwan, both at sea and in the air. Is Taiwan ready to defend itself? Well, there's split opinion among the experts, especially because experts like to point out how difficult it would be to have an amphibious invasion of Taiwan for men and equipment from China to sail across the Taiwan Strait and to land on Taiwan and to conquer Taiwan would be extraordinarily difficult. The Taiwan military does have some strong points. They typically do invest in their military, although they need to invest more. And then the thing that we really don't know is whether or not the United States will come to Taiwan's assistance in that scenario. This is why the policy of the United States is often called strategic ambiguity, because it's ambiguous. It's not clear whether or not the United States would come to Taiwan's aid. And another thing to keep in mind is that if the United States really would come to Taiwan's assistance in the event of a Chinese invasion, it's going to take a number of days for the United States to arrive, whether that's in the air or by sea by dispatching the U.S. Navy to come to Taiwan's assistance. It will take time. These are things that won't happen literally within a day. So then the issue becomes, how long can Taiwan hold out until the United States arrives? And on that one, the Taiwan military often says they could hold out for at least 2 weeks until the United States is able to arrive on the scene and come to assist Taiwan. But there are a lot of assumptions and a lot of unknown factors that cause us to say that we really don't know how that situation will play out. We do know it's difficult to launch an amphibious invasion, and we do know that Taiwan would need to hold out maybe for about 2 weeks, but we don't know for sure that the United States would even come to Taiwan's assistance.
Do you think wars in the Middle East and Ukraine have led to the sidelining of the vulnerable position in the South and East China Sea due to Chinese aggression?
There's certainly a lot of focus in the world right now on the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. And sometimes that means people are not paying as much attention to this part of the world. But for certain, there is extraordinarily high tensions both in the East China Sea, where China and Japan have a sovereignty dispute over islands that China calls Diaoyu and Japan calls Senkaku. There's the dispute in the Taiwan Strait between China and Taiwan. And then there's the dispute in the South China Sea between China and several other countries in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, Brunei, Indonesia, and Vietnam, as well as Taiwan, which has competing claims in the South China Sea with China. So this part of the world is certainly very volatile. There's certainly a high possibility that sometime in the future there could be a shooting war over any of those issues, whether in the East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, or the South China Sea. So it really behooves all the countries in the region to invest more in their national defense.
Will Trump's tariff plan for China weaken the nation?
Well, there's certainly some concern in China and Taiwan about the potential for higher tariffs. A lot of Taiwan-owned companies still do their manufacturing in China. So if Trump imposes tariffs on China, it's not just Chinese companies that will be hurt. It's also Taiwan-owned companies that ship products from China to the United States that will be hurt as well. So I don't think either Taiwan or China are rooting for a tariff war. They probably both hope that this could be avoided. But we do know that higher tariffs will also increase the cost to consumers in the United States. That's a fact. However, President Trump is hoping that a few different things could happen, that he could raise tariffs on China. There'll be more purchases from the United States from other more friendly countries, whether that's Indonesia or Malaysia or Vietnam, and that there'd be a move of more manufacturing back to the United States. So Trump is certainly hoping that if he raises tariffs on China, some of the expense that would fall onto U.S. consumers will be addressed by shifting the supply chain to countries that don't face higher tariffs and/or moving manufacturing back to the United States.
Do you think after conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, the third major war could be in the South China Sea?
It's certainly a possibility. And what I often say is that the relevant stakeholders, such as governments in the region, their military, or even the population at large, they should conduct themselves as if a war is going to start tomorrow. So that's frankly how high tensions are in the South China Sea. We really are not very far away from a war. The possibility, as I said, it's high. And governments and other stakeholders, they need to really prepare as if that's a possibility. I wish we could say that this was not a possibility, but I think we have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And preparing for the worst means assuming that there's a high likelihood that there will be a war one day in the South China Sea.
Thank you, Ross Feingold, for speaking to us on Focal Length. With that, it's a wrap on this episode. For more international news updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.